Hi, everybody. I'm going to be sharing a lesson that I did in my honors 10th grade English class. And the theme of the unit and the essential question is here. How is compassion necessary to the human experience? And we began just by going over these 4 words, had them on the board, and we talked about the difference and the nuance between compassion versus empathy versus pity and sympathy. And we shared definitions of what we thought was the nuances between. Then we watched this short video. It's about 2 minutes and 53 seconds that kind of illustrated the differences. And it really did give some students something to think about with these illustrated characters going through these stages of sympathy, empathy, compassion, and pity, and the differences between them. And from there, we went to the textbook. There's a short story that was in the curriculum that we were to read, and the title is "What Did This Goldfish Would You Wish?" And really the premise of the story is there's this documentary filmmaker who wants to go and put together and kind of be famous for his documentary film work, but he's just starting out. But he decides to go door to door and ask people, knock on the door and ask them if they had a magic goldfish and it could grant 3 wishes, what would it be? So he goes along and does that. And he gets some different answers along the way. And then what happens is he ends up knocking on the door of somebody who has a goldfish in their house. And this sort of becomes this magical realism moment where this goldfish does talk. It can be a little confusing for the kids because there's lots of jumps in place, and then this goldfish actually does start talking, and I'm probably confusing you right now. But what I have students do along the way is that we listen to the SoundCloud version of it, and it's about 13 minutes as well. So we will pause as we read along. Students aren't reading on their own. They're reading along with the audio. And I feel like a 13-minute story is a great amount of time. I wouldn't have students read something aloud or play the audio for a 50-minute, even 25-minute. I think 13 to 15 minutes is a perfect amount of time to still sit still, read aloud with the audio. All right. And then after that, we went to the text, and there were some questions that we discussed, not all of these here, but these were questions that were in the book. From there, there is also a documentary, I'm sorry, not a documentary, a video that was entered in a film festival that's an adaptation. So it's an adaptation of the short story. And so here's this shot that I screenshotted, shows the character of the narrator kind of going up door to door, asking a question. And his whole point in this story was this man was trying to get to know people and get people to open up, to have that compassion and people to tell their stories. And so we watched that video as well and talked about the differences even between the adaptation and the text. And again, talked about some differences. This version here actually really Americanized it, whereas the other version that we read, the SoundCloud, the text version, was I believe set in Palestine. So we see definitely there's local color and flavor in the audio of the person who's reading it and the story. And then we have this this was set in Southern California, I believe. But we did talk about the loss of culture between the 2 versions. That was a discussion that we had. But then we did ask students, what does it take to go up and interview people? And we highlighted Brandon Stanton. I showed a video of him. He is the human behind Humans of New York, who goes up to strangers and asks them how he approaches them on the street. And he talks about going from a level of fear to intimacy. And we talked about how that goes along with compassion. So we watched a video of him talking about how he approaches strangers on the street, as the character does in the short story. So we then explored the art of interviewing. James Lipton, you may know from Inside the Actors Studio, does a lot of interviewing of celebrities, but he does get them to open up. And the idea, he does develop an environment of compassion and empathy when he is interviewing. And there's a great interview you see here with Bradley Cooper, and Bradley Cooper was one of his former students, and he comes back on the show. There really is some heartfelt moments in that. And I usually just show the beginning parts of that, so I don't show the whole thing. But after that, we talked about, which is very fun to do with the students, and everybody really is in on this point, but we give the list of the 10 questions that he does go over at the end of every interview. So no matter who he interviews, he always asks these 10 questions. And I love all these, and we talk about them, and students will then turn and talk with a neighbor and a friend and ask these. And number 5 certainly gets a little controversial, but I tell the students, they don't have to write them down. They don't have to answer that question, but that is a question that that James Lipton does ask. But we get some interesting answers from students and just like warming up and starting to talk with each other. This is a lesson we do in the beginning of the school year. We do talk about what are some good questions to get somebody to open up. Brandon Stanton asked people when he interviews people from Humans of New York, what is your greatest struggle? We did talk about some other student suggestions of what they may give for a project if they were to interview a stranger. And we did talk about open-ended and follow-up questions and why they are important for the interview. So really this whole how is compassion essential for the human experience, it revolves around getting to students to this point where we get to the interview. All right, and I did add the magic question at the end of an interview. You're always going to want to ask someone, you know, is there anything else like you'd like to add? Because students will and people will sometimes open up more at the end there. I have them practice interviewing a neighbor at their table. Then what happened was a teacher friend of mine, we got together and interviewed each other in front of the students. And Miss Taylor was a new student, or sorry, a new teacher this year. I had been friends with her, but she came to my school and transferred new, and I knew she had just done a cross-country trip, so I couldn't wait to hear about it. So I interviewed her in front of the class, and then she switched and interviewed me, and we just modeled for students how to interview. Then they switched roles and they practiced interviewing each other again in partners. And it was cool because Ms. Taylor and I both brought both of our classes together to do this. But this was the essential kind of outcome. What we wanted to have students do was to create kind of a Humans of C. Milton, which is our school, speaking, listening interview project where they had to choose somebody in the school community and arrange and conduct an interview in order to develop some compassion for a stranger, right? Or compassion for someone that they didn't know. And they had to document their process. And so these were the parts of what they had to create. Right, they had to take a photo of their person. We had a Humans of C. Milton write Padlet. They had to include a caption, and I'll share you some of those. They had to at the end write a description of their person that would describe them to somebody new and reflect on their interview process of what they may have learned. And then later, even further than that, they had to apply like what opportunities might they have to practice interviewing techniques and just opening up and expressing compassion, empathy to another person. So this was kind of the outcome of what they did. And I'm going to show you real quick of the other things that we shared. Let's see if this will come up real quick. I'm trying to. Here we go. So here, if you can see, hopefully you can still see this. This was the Humans of C. Milton, right? Padlet that we created. So we used Padlet for students to upload pictures. Josh Adams here was interviewed by Nadia Kravash, and we have a quote here. So we also had another one where students, again, tried to talk about taking pictures of people and interesting poses or pictures that capture their personality here, and then the quotes beneath. So this was the final project. We also did print out some of these pictures and hung it in the cafeteria too. So going back to the UDL examples here, and I don't know if you guys can see this now, but if you can't, I'm sorry. But if you missed the Padlet, I'll probably put a link in here. But I do believe that there was a customized way to display information. They could choose different ways to photograph their person. We did, again, in the lesson, offer audio because we listened to the story, and then there was visual because there was a visual to the story. And we did, again, promote understanding across the language. We did denote because the story was written in another language, and we saw how some of that was lost in translation as we read the text and looked at the listen to the audio. Again, the multimedia with the video here, and definitely the big ideas and relationships we kept coming back to that with as far as compassion and empathy necessary in order to interview a stranger and interview somebody that you don't know. Some other things here. Definitely we had options for physical action when students could interview each other. We let them get up and move around and go to a place in the library because this is a lesson that we brought together. So we let students go off and interview, move where they wanted to move. You could see from some of my photos, and if not, I'll put it in there, of how students were able to take pictures of themselves, either maybe they curled up next to a book or on one of the couches in the library. So students were able to move around too. The multimedia that we use, they did have to use Padlet, but still they could have taken pictures with their phone. They could have taken pictures with their computer. too. And it was something that everybody looked forward to seeing each other. So there really was 100% buy-in because it was about each other's pictures were coming up there too. And a couple other I'll just mention here. Optimize individual choice and autonomy. Some students wanted to go out and interview others in the community. We just said maybe they interviewed a family member or an adult, another adult that they in the community, a teacher. Sometimes people did, a step parent, people have interviewed. So it was certainly a way they could choose who they wanted to interview. It just had to be somehow connected to the Sea Mountain Wright community too. Certainly it did foster collaboration and community when we had that Padlet and kept adding to that. So that was a successful lesson, in my opinion. And let me just see if we can go back here. Hopefully you're able to still see all of these different photos that we had of our school community that they enjoyed doing these. And again, I did it once too, just by myself as a teacher. And then the next year I collaborated with another teacher. So we brought it together, but certainly was something fun to go through and see. Thank you. Let me know if you have any questions.